Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's class on lean operations. I hope you're doing very well. In today's class, we are dealing with a pretty interesting subject. And this subject deals with factories and manufacturing concerns, excuse me, and in general, operations. And so, what the lecture is going to be about is basically focusing on how to make production in factories as efficient as possible and how to cut out wastage. As you all know, and I would suggest that in case you have forgotten, I would suggest you review the lecture, the first lecture that I gave in class on the 7 deadly wastes. And that ties in very well with today's lecture as well. All right, to start off with, I'm just going to talk a little bit about lean operations overall. And when you're looking at lean operations and in manufacturing concerns, large concerns, some of the things that companies are most concerned about is making sure that there is not a lot of delay. So they want to have the production moving seamlessly without delays, and things are being moved from one condition to another as fast as possible. And so what the net aim is that things are made correct the first time around, and that things are made fast as possible. Some concerns, such as some companies such as Toyota, actually have it down to a science. And in Toyota, every single function in the production is timed, and there are SOPs on standard operating procedures on how everything should be done and how much time every step should take. But it's not only the steps that need to be considered, it's also the time from changing from one step to another that needs to be reduced. So this is something that is of paramount importance when looking at lean operations. If we had to summarize what I just said, I'm going to go ahead. It's mentioned in this slide. I'm just going to read it out for you, and it's a synopsis of everything that I've mentioned so far. So lean operations is a systematic process of minimizing downtime between part changeovers or when moving from one condition to another. This also means setup time reduction. So if we talk about, we just think about what I just mentioned over here, systematic process of minimizing downtime. What is downtime? Downtime is when the downtime is effectively the time when a machine or service is out of action or unavailable for use. So you definitely don't want that one of your machines in your operations is temporarily out of order. Why? Because that will stop your entire production cycle, and that will increase overall costs and the time it takes to finish the production cycle. Well, moving forward in the same definition, so I just mentioned systematic process of minimizing downtime between part changeovers. Now, what is a changeover? Changeover is basically a change from one system or situation to another. Changeovers impact the flow of the product, which impacts throughput, productivity, and capacity. So again, what you want is that there's not a lot of delay from one process to another. So there's not a gap. It just moves seamlessly. The production moves seamlessly in the factory. And so all of this is also made possible by reducing setup times. And I will be talking a little bit more about that as the lecture goes on. Okay. So if we think about this in real terms now, and many times it's easier to understand theory when you apply it in a real case situation. So let me give you an example of a restaurant. And I'm also going to give you after that another example of an airline, just to make sure that you understand this concept very well. So you go into a restaurant and you're expecting good service. One of the key things that you really want is that there's not a long waiting line. If you go into a restaurant of your choice and you end up having to wait for up to 3 hours, you probably will not want to go back to that restaurant. All right, so that's an example of, once you go in, let's say the waiting time, let's say that's eliminated and you're actually seated on your favorite table in your restaurant. But there's a huge delay. Somebody comes and takes your order, and again, there's a huge delay in getting the food to you. Again, this is something that customers are not going to be ready to they're not going to be very happy about. So in general, restaurants have to be very quick, and they can't afford to make mistakes. So the order has to be correct. People have to be seated as soon as they arrive. The order has to be correct. The cleanup process has to be pretty quick, because what you want is, if there's a table that the customers have left and it hasn't been cleaned, or it takes a very long time to clean it, the changeover time will increase, right? And if there are a lot of delays, that means the downtime of this entire process is increasing. So you want to reduce both of these. And when you reduce both of these, it becomes a very smooth functioning flow. People come in, they're seated, the order is taken, food is served, the cleanup process is quick, the billing is quick, and overall, there are more customers that the restaurant can cater to. Similarly, if we think about another example of airlines, and you go in, let's say, and you need, you're at the airport, and there's, everything, there's one airport that you go to, everything is just going extremely slow. And so you go into the ticketing counter, and there's just a really long line. There are very few people, at the ticketing counter, and so there's a very long queue. And finally, once you get your boarding card, you go through security, and security just takes a very long time. Well, if that happens, there's a very high possibility that you may miss your flight. Also, it would be taking you so long just to get to your flight to the boarding area. And so this is an example where the system is not efficient. There are a lot of delays. And so if it was a lean operation, on the other hand, everything would be systematic and quick. So in a lean operation of the similar, let's take another airport that is efficient and has lean operations. Well, maybe they would have some computer kiosks where you could just go in and swipe your passport and get your boarding card, or they would have more people at the ticketing counter. The security would be going, there would be it would be quick and efficient, and you would get your boarding card and you would be able to go to the boarding area and catch your flight. So in these two examples, I hope you understand that you want to, in an efficient, lean operations, there's a minimizing of downtime between part changeovers, or when moving from one condition to another. All right, so this is, something that happens pretty easily when there's a big flow of customers, or there's a production process that is, there's a ongoing production process. And so usually there's a system that starts working. Sometimes, however, you need to make a production cycle of a rare small, part. And so when there is a new production cycle that you have to make for something new, for a small lot of something, sometimes it's a lot more challenging to have lean operations in those situations. But if usually what happens is, if there's a big lot of people, or there's a huge production cycle that's regularly going through in a factory, it becomes, there's a higher probability of bringing in efficiency. It's easier to sort of bring in efficiency in something like that. All right, the next concept that I'm going to be talking to you about is set up time. And when you really when what I mean by setup time is that when, let's say, you have a factory and you have workers that come in every morning and they go to their workstation and they're about to start working. What you want to make sure is that they have all the equipment and that they're ready to go in the morning, and that there are no major problems that stop them from performing their job. And so obviously if there's huge setup time for in a company, then there's going to be delays and it's not going to be a lean operation. So now the question is, if we really try to break down reducing setup time, how can a factory do that? How can a manufacturing concern reduce their setup time? And so before we go into that, I just want to mention a couple of quick things over here. The reduction of setup time can be a huge competitive advantage or disadvantage for a company. So very important to remember that nowadays, previously there were fewer products in the market. Nowadays, FMCGs such as Procter & Gamble or Unilever, they're making, if just in the category of shampoo, for example, they'll have several shampoos that they're manufacturing. If you look at cooking oil, they'll have maybe different varieties that they're cornflakes. The same company may be having more than one brand that they're manufacturing. So what's happening is that there's a lot more variety being offered to customers, and as a result, there are a lot more supply chains even within organizations that have to be run efficiently and effectively, and you have to reduce the setup time for all of the supply chains. Okay. And no matter what your strategy is, you're doing push, you're doing pull. Regardless of that, you want to reduce your setup times. All right, so now I'm going to start telling you a little bit about how to reduce setup times. The first thing is, first step, one big way to reduce your setup time, improve changeover methods. And so what we had discussed previously is, that changeover is the change from one system or situation to another. So let's just look at an example of what we're talking about over here. This is, in Formula One racing, right? Formula One racing, right on the slide, I have a photograph right over here for you. And what happens in Formula One racing is that the racer will race the whole track, and then the racing car will stop. And what you see in this photograph over here is that simultaneously a lot of people come and service the car. And so right over here, you see people changing the tires, refueling, checking everything just to make sure everything is going fine. And so there are 4 tires that need to be changed. And there are 4 sets of people doing that. And over here, you see some other people, fueling the car. So what's happening is that, there's a lot of simultaneous work happening. But the question is, okay, how can this be made even more efficient? So one of the things that you can do, if somebody asks you, well, okay, how do you make this service of the Formula One car even faster? One thing you could do is videotape it. Videotape while all of these people are going in and servicing the car. And when you look at the video, you can analyze it and you can figure out how to make the operation, this servicing, even more efficient and faster. So that's one thing. You can do a video analysis. The second thing is simplify and standardize this equipment and tooling. You cannot afford to have these people over here looking for their tools. They have to have everything simple, standard, and easy for them to use. Also, the thing is that you don't want to have necessarily people very specialized. You have to have people doing, that are multitasking. So it's not like one person will be like, oops, I'm sorry, I can't change the tire. I can only do the fueling. You want to make sure that your workers have enough knowledge that they can do pretty much anything regarding the servicing if they're on the servicing team. And this applies to factories across the board. Right? What you want is that nobody in your operations is standing idle and wasting time. And you also want to make sure that there are not any bottlenecks. And bottlenecks effectively, and I've discussed this before, but I think in a previous lecture, bottlenecks is reducing situations that cause situations or problems that are problematic. And so if you look at a bottle, right, a bottle has a thin neck. And the idea is that, you know, the thin neck stops the water or reduces the flow of the water. And you don't want situations that cause delays, because again, that's like a bottleneck, right? It's reducing the flow of operations. And so you want to eliminate bottlenecks. You want to make sure that things are smooth flowing. If there are problems, if there are bottlenecks, you want to make sure that you resolve them. And so again, I'm making a loop over here, but if you do a video analysis, it's sometimes very easy to identify the bottlenecks and to resolve them. All right, let's look at another way to reduce setup time. The next way is, you know, planning. It's called planning and staging. Okay, and so here you want to make sure that everybody along the supply chain has the required tools, personnel, equipment, documents, and material that they need to support the change. You cannot have people standing or working, you know, coming into the office in the morning and they don't have a computer, let's say. How are they going to do their work? So you want to make sure that your workers have everything they need to complete the job at hand. Also, you need to ensure that work can be done concurrently. And so what this means is that instead of sequential working, where you finish one process and then you start working on the next, and you know, like a sequence of work, you do things simultaneously. Right? So you don't have people, you know, some people just waiting along the assembly line. Okay, I'm just, you know, standing here idle, waiting for when the part comes my way, and then I'll start working on it. No, people will be working on several things at the same time. And so this will allow reduction in, you know, idle time, or this will reduce the amount of time that's wasted across the supply chain. There should be a good flow of information in the supply chain also, and people should be able to know when things are coming their way. And so just to wrap this up, you know, concurrent working simultaneously on various processes in the supply chain, that's called staging, right? So you plan and you stage, and you want to make sure that there's nobody standing idle. Everybody's working on something that's adding value. And just to give you an example of this, let's think about the airline industry again, right? And let's say there's a flight, and the flight is going from Karachi all the way to the US. And so what happens is it stops midway just to get some refueling done, and people are asked to leave the plane. Well, what happens is that immediately once people leave, there's refueling of the airplane, there's cleaning of the airplane, there is servicing of the airplane, new food is brought in for the remainder leg of the flight. And so all of this work is done simultaneously. It's not as if, you know, the cleaning is going to happen first, and then after that the fueling is going to happen, and then after that the food is going to come in. If things were to be done that way, the second way that I mentioned, it would take a very, very long time. And so the people would have to wait a very long time. Instead, when things are done simultaneously or concurrently and there's staging done, then things move a lot faster. And so, people are working simultaneously. So the fueling is being done and the cleaning is being done and the catering people are bringing in new food, all happening at the same time. And so this is an example of planning a stage. Now, of course, in order to do this type of staging or working concurrently, you have to plan. And so by that, what I mean is everybody needs to be informed. Okay, the flight has landed. Please, XYZ teams go in and do what you have to do. And this is how much time you have. So in order to stage, you definitely need to be able to plan. But this is something that is extremely important to do if you want lean operations. All right, let's talk about yet another way to reduce setup times. So over here on this slide, it's mentioned one of the things that can be done is make sure that your employees have new and duplicate equipment as required, right? And so what we mean by this is that you need to make sure that your workers have the tools that they need to get the job done. If, let's say, I am tasked some very important task and my computer is outdated and continuously malfunctions, I will not be able to deliver. No matter how hard I try, I will not be able to deliver. On the other hand, if I have a computer that's functioning extremely well, I can get the job done as soon as possible, get it done correctly. And in case my computer doesn't work, my company should have backups so that I can go and get a loaner computer and work, get the job done, and 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 that's extremely important. So what's really beneficial for factories is to have new and duplicate equipment. And what that again basically means is have some extra equipment just in case something goes wrong. You don't want there to be a very long delay. And when you have some additional or duplicate equipment, that basically helps you ensure lean operations and reduction of downtime. The fourth way to really reduce setup time is, and this is a little bit similar to the whole video analysis, but yet different. So the fourth way and the last way to reduce setup times is track setup time reduction progress. And so what we mean by this is, time different steps. If you have workers working on the production floor, you should be timing the amount of, the time it's taking them to complete their job or their activity or the task at hand. And so, it shouldn't be that there's a large variation in the timing. And if there is, then you will immediately be able to identify that there is a problem, there is a bottleneck. This job required, let's say, 5 minutes. And that's the standard operating procedure. And let's say, it's taking 10 minutes. Well, you know that there's some problem over there. And then you can go and resolve the problem. And do you only do this once? Absolutely not. This needs to be done on a consistent basis. You need to be measuring consistently how much time it's taking. And not only that, you also want to measure how much time is being spent on the setup section. So definitely how long the process is taking, but how long is the setup taking? So if every morning people are coming in and they're taking a good, half an hour to set up, that's a problem. Things should be in place and they should be ready to start operations as soon as possible. And, once they get in the morning. And so tracking setup reduction progress is a great way to, again, reduce your inefficiencies, reduce the downtime, reduce the changeover time. Okay, moving forward, I'm now going to be talking a little bit about how a factory should be laid out. Now, this is something pretty interesting. Some people may say, does it really matter, what the layout is, or what the factory floor looks like, if there's lighting in the factory floor or not, if there are fire exits or not? Is it really important? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. The factory layout has a very large impact on production, and we'll be looking at why. So the factory layout can either help improve the flow of production, or it can cause delays and constrain the flow of work. Wrong layouts create waste because they are disconnected. If there are 5 people that need to work on a specific process, and each one of those 5 people are in different locations, that job will take longer than if they're all in the same vicinity. It's just going to be faster and more efficient. So you want to make sure, you want to be very mindful about how things are laid out on the factory floor. Now, the Japanese have done research, and they have, based on that research, a lot of people suggest using cellular manufacturing and making smaller lots in work cells. And I'll be showing you an example of this in a little while. Also, it's very beneficial if similar equipment and technology are grouped together. And also you want to make sure that there is not useless movement in your factory. So if you're seeing people moving for no reason from one end to another, just behaving busy, you really want to eliminate that. And you also want to make sure that all of your equipment is very well labeled and easily accessible to people, and that it's grouped together. So maybe if you have in one of these slides, let's see this one over here. I'm just going to expand this really a little bit bigger here. So you see how all the tools over here are arranged, right? And you see that all the similar tools are arranged, they're kind of put together. So all the screwdrivers, for example, they're all over here, they're all together. And so, this again helps make it easier for people to go and find what they need, right? These are just some ideas to improve and to give you an idea about how factory layouts actually how factories should be laid out. And but these kind of things actually make a very big difference. So let's look at this slide next. Okay, and this is the Japanese work cell on the right. This is the Japanese work cell. And this is just a straight out assembly line. And on the side, it says that when you have things, when there is a process that's arranged in a single line, it makes it hard to balance tasks because work may not be divided easily. Also, this gentleman over here has, right on the left, has no visibility on what the person on the right is doing. And so, it's sort of a blind way of doing the work. Now, compared to that, if you make a work cell, which is U-shaped, right? And so this process is now changed, and it's made, instead of a straight line, it's changed in a U shape. Then what happens is that workers have better access. It's easier for them to move around and do the job that needs to be done on this, in this U-shaped work cell. And so, generally speaking, when you have a straight line, assembly line like this, people are, they aren't pretty cross-trained. They're just doing one particular task. But when you have a U-shaped kind of a work cell, there usually people are cross-trained. And so instead of having 4 people over here on the straight assembly line, you see only 3. So, and this is because, employee movement has reduced. It's easier to communicate, and it's easier to sort of inspect and check the quality of what's being done in this U-shaped cellular format. And again, this slide really sums it up again. When you do have a U-shaped work cell, there's more visibility of what's going on, in who's working on what. There's less material movement, less scheduling. You can just sort of turn around, talk to somebody and say, hey, are you done with that? Is it going to take you, how much longer is it going to take you? Rather than, speaking to somebody who's sitting all the way at the other end of the assembly line. And there's more worker flexibility. And the work teams are self-directed. They are able to manage work, hire, fire, find ways to improve. So when these work cells are given a lot of independence, and they are asked to sort of, they are empowered, versus, people working on just these old-fashioned assembly lines and just working on one particular task. That's all they know. That's all they're trained for. Again, in the U-shaped, they're cross-trained, and so they are a lot more empowered because they can manage things. They have more visibility, and they have all of the other additional benefits that I just mentioned. And this an example of these two. If you want to really think about it, just imagine a situation where there is, let's say, a tailoring operation, and shirts are being made. And in the assembly line, again, it's going to be, one person is going to be doing, let's say, the cutting, and the other person is going to be sewing, and so on and so forth. Whereas in the U-shaped, everybody is going to be knowledgeable in cutting, how to sew things, and how to iron, how to do a quality check. And so you can imagine that, in the situation where in the assembly line, where everybody just has knowledge of just one particular task, it's just going to take a little longer, less communication, less visibility. When you have, tailors that are cross-trained in the U-shaped, on the other hand, it's just going to be quicker and probably more efficient. And the overall quality is also going to be better of the product. Now, the importance of a good layout, there are many, many important benefits of having a good layout. And I'm just going to read through these because it's important for you to realize the importance of having a good layout on a factory floor. So if there is a good layout, your production cycle time will definitely decrease. Things will be made faster. There'll be less work in process inventory. So things will be made, the amount of time that things are half made is going to go down. They're just, the speed in general, the cycle time will reduce. And so the speed of making things will increase. If you have a good layout, you don't need, the floor space requirement goes down. So, things can be arranged in less space. There'll be less material handling. And there'll be less complex scheduling and fewer control systems. So again, just more communication will be possible. Increased product quality, increased operational flexibility, lower total cost, because now again, things are going to be made faster, using less resources, and increased employee ownership for success of the product. And so once you, and using, let's say, a cellular, work arrangement, your employees are more empowered, and they're also going to feel a lot more prouder of, what they're producing at the end of the day. So these are some of the benefits of a right layout, and I hope you understand, after this discussion, the importance of having a great layout. But with all of this, the question is, well, why is it that not all the factories in the world, shift to these cellular methods and improve their work layout? Why is it, And the thing is that in general, there's a lot of resistance to change. People usually like continuing operations the old school way. And when you tell them, okay, there's a new way of doing things, let's restructure this factory floor. Another really big issue is that it's tough because you have to redo the wiring many times. The building may be old. Maybe there's new equipment that needs to be bought. The equipment may be too large to move. So there are certain challenges with making these kind of changes, and also there's investment, but it's well worth it, because we just saw on the previous slide that this actually has the right layout has huge benefits, and ultimately it improves profitability of a company. Now, one thing to mention is that nowadays there are a lot of computer simulations and apps and programs where you can lay out how you want. You can sort of use the app to make these mock diagrams of how you would like your factory to look. And based on that, then you could make the changes that are required. Now, previously, if without these kind of apps and these simulations, it was dangerous, because you would perhaps try one arrangement, change the entire factory floor, and realize, oops, that's not going to really work. So these simulations and these computer applications really help you think through the process in depth, and then subsequently make the investment and the changes that are required. One thing to also mention is that nowadays, the importance of having a good work environment is no longer just considered important on factory floors. Even offices are being changed in a very big way. And so corporate offices are spending a lot of money across the world to alter their office spaces. Previously, there would be separate offices, and there would be kind of everybody working in a silo. Nowadays, there's more of a open office floor structure that is coming in. And interestingly, if you look at some of the big firms like PricewaterhouseCoopers and a lot of other startup offices, the office environment is being made quite beautiful, and just a pleasure to work in. Things such as the colors that are being used in the office, the lighting, the general coffee stations. Sometimes they even have certain table tennis and other games that people can play in their free time. And so the reason is that there's a lot of work that's going into the study of all of this, and what they've realized is that all of this has an impact. The way the office looks, the way it's structured has an impact on productivity. And so if you have a very well laid out office, you can imagine that your employees are going to be happier, and that they are also going to be a lot more productive and hopefully more creative as well. And so nowadays there's a lot of emphasis on really delving deep in understanding how to improve layouts of offices, and this in order to improve the overall workflow. And there are certain things known as Kaizen events, and I discussed this at length in my TQM class, but Kaizen events are actually taking place to realize how to improve the layout of offices in the best way possible. Couple of things I also wanted to mention in terms of just coming back to factories, there are certain machines called carousels, and you see them, for example, an example of a carousel is, when you're at an airport and you're waiting to get your luggage, luggage is put out on a wheel kind of a machine, and that's a carousel. That's an example of a carousel. And so once your suitcase comes by, you sort of pick it off of the carousel and you take it. And so carousels are being used more and more in factories. And also they also there's, hub and spoke formats are also being used. And I really don't need you to go in too much detail, but a hub is sort of you can imagine almost like a circle in the middle, and the spokes are the, like almost like if you think of the sun, so the hub would be the sun, and the rays of the sun would be like the spokes coming out of the hub. And that's just one way of, there are different formats, and that's just one format. But just to, I just wanted to put it out there. There are many different formats that factories follow. And so if you're ever in a situation where you need to sort of research on it, there's a lot of information on various formats for setting up factories. All right, so another concept that I wanted to discuss with you in this class is called Kanban. And this is basically a signaling device that gives authorization instruction downstream to upstream. It's nonverbal, lights, usually cards, spaces in a rack, squares on the floor. And so what the point is that many times on a big factory floor, you have hundreds of people, or, tens of people working on a factory floor. And you can't really afford having everybody screaming to each other or talking on walkie-talkies, because it's going to get, very difficult to manage. Just imagine having 100+ people screaming at each other on a factory floor. That just wouldn't work. And on the other hand, people on the factory floor need to communicate with each other, right? So if I've finished something, or it's going to take me, let's say I just got an order, I may need to let the next person down the factory line know that, hey, I just got an order. It's going to come your way in like 5 minutes. So please just get ready. How do I do that? Well, one way is that I scream and say, hey, just want to let you know I just got an order. And I, and that's one way of doing it. But another way is that maybe I could press a button, right? And say, okay, order received. And that button would flash a light, and maybe a green light. And the person down the factory floor will immediately know that an order has been received, and they will go to their workstation and be ready to work on it as soon as possible. And so that's the idea, that instead of screaming and saying or shouting down the factory line, I'm actually using a signaling device. I'm pressing a button, which is and there's a, a green light flashing, which is a signaling device. That's an example of a Kanban. So it's non-verbal. It could be a light. It could be that a card flash, pops up all of a sudden. But anything, it's basically a signaling device that's non-verbal. And so that's something that's very much used on factory floors nowadays. Sometimes there's different terminology. There's production cards, which is, a signal, like I just mentioned, to produce something. So, the order comes in and you sort of push a button, and a production card will go up and say, hey, you need to sort of produce something in the next day or whatever based on the order. There's things such as conveyance cards, that, these are cards that are signals to retrieve a part. Another terminology that is sometimes used on factory floors is called supermarkets. And this is basically temporarily holding of inventory. This is an example, again, of a Kanban. This is something that a lot of people use on factory floors, and it's it's very beneficial. So here you can see that if, everything is sort of just, there's their cards, and they have something written on it with all the tasks to do, what planning needs to be done, what development tasks need to be done, what needs to be tested, what needs to be deployed, and what's done. And so every time somebody is done with one of these tasks, they can change the card and put it in a different section, or just eliminate it if it's all done. And so this is another way. This is just a non-verbal way of communicating what's going on a factory floor. So again, a non-verbal way of communication on the factory floor is what Kanban is. And it's used very often. All right, I'm reaching the end of this lecture pretty soon, but there's certain important things that I definitely, these are new terminologies that I'm going to be introducing to you. So please bear with me, and hopefully you'll be able to understand these new terms very well, because they are important. So one of the terms used in factories is called uniform loading. And what this basically means is that you want to try and standardize the quantity of inputs that are regularly coming into your factory. Just to give you an example, let's say I have a small business of making cakes. And I make cakes, 5 cakes a day. Based on that, I inform my grocery store in my neighborhood that I will be needing, 20 eggs, 3 gallons of milk, some icing sugar, and 2 boxes of icing sugar. And so I let them know that because I'm making 5 cakes a day, that's a standard amount that I need every single day. And that there's not going to be necessarily any change. And that's very good for me, because I will know for a fact that I'll have the groceries that I need on a regular basis from my grocery store, who I know very well provides good quality, ingredients, and it's great for the grocery store, right? Because they can plan accordingly. And so what you don't want is that there's a big shift. There's a dramatic shift. Why? Because then it's possible that if I go to my grocery store, they won't have it in stock. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that the demand and supply is managed so that there's a standard quantity of inputs coming in. And the best way to do this is to share information. And so if, let's say, I've been making 5 cakes and all of a sudden now it's changed and I'm getting orders for 8 cakes, I need to make sure that I, let my grocery store know, so that things are balanced across the supply chain. Now, is it important for me to have this sort of a uniform loading for every single thing in my supply chain? Probably not. Usually there are, the 20% of items that make 80% of the product cost. So things that I definitely need, like the eggs and the milk and the icing sugar. I mean, I want to make sure that I have that, a uniform loading on a regular basis. These things are coming in. But let's say there's some small little decoration that I put on the cake. Do I need to make sure that that small little decoration I buy, daily, like one small decoration on a daily basis? No, I can buy those in advance, right? And I can keep them in stock because it's a small item and it doesn't really add much to the cost, and it's not a big part of the production, and it's not going to affect the overall quality of the final product. So this uniform loading is usually done for 20% of the items that make 80% of the cost. All right, the next important terminology that is important for you to know is level scheduling, which effectively means standard production levels, making sure that the amount you're making, there's not a lot of variation. In general, variation is not good in a supply chain. You want to make sure that there is a consistent pattern of production, that it's not like there's huge shifts, that the demand is, for 20 cakes one day and 0 cakes the next day. That's not a smart situation for you to be in. And the reason is that it's very difficult for you to plan. If you have a request to make 20 cakes all of a sudden, you may not have enough ovens in your house to make 20 cakes. You may not have, enough, there might not be enough groceries in the market. You may have run in a situation where you may have to hire somebody because all of a sudden you have to make 20 cakes. And then the problem is the next day when you have 0, you still have to pay the wages for the person that you hired. Or if you ended up buying, an extra oven, well, you made a capital investment, but the next 3 days, let's say you have 0 orders, that's, wasted money, or that capital investment may just be, your costs are basically have effectively gone up. Instead, it's a whole lot better if you have a steady pattern, a consistent pattern. And that way you can schedule and build the same product mix every day in a given period. Nowadays, there is a lot of mass customization going on where, products are half made or, 3/4 made. And then at the end, there's certain customization that happens based on customers' preferences. This makes level scheduling a little difficult, but at least for 3/4 of the production process, level scheduling can still be done. Another term that's very important for you to know is TAKT, or T-A-K-T. And this basically means a steady, regular beat. Effectively, what this means is that the production should be happening at a steady rate. It shouldn't be that, as I mentioned, there's a whole lot of variation. And that steady rate should match the customer demand. So if there's 5 pieces, all of a sudden there's a demand for 5 goods in the market, well then simultaneously there should be a production of 5 goods. And so you have to match the beat of production and demand. And so that's extremely important. What you don't want is to make too much or too little, because if you don't match the beat of the demand and you end up making too many goods, what happens is you'll be stuck with a surplus. And what are you going to do with that excess inventory? Sometimes you're able to sell it, but other times you're stuck with stock. And, especially if it's it's a food item that can go to waste. So there are all kinds of issues with having too much inventory. And also if you don't have enough inventory, then your customer may go to another company. So again, very important to be mindful about, TAKT and the steady, regular beat of production based on demand. Of course, demand is not always the same. I mean, there are going to be certain changes in demand. And if those changes happen, then your staff should be cross-trained and flexible enough to manage the changes in supply chain. But in general, as I mentioned, you should aim to try and have a level scheduling across your supply chain. Finally, something that's becoming more and more important, a lot of people, sometimes there are factories in, let's say, Karachi, Pakistan, and there may be foreign orders, but whether or not they get it sometimes is determined when people actually fly in from abroad and check the factory floor, and then they kind of decide whether or not they would like to work with the factory. And they look at the factory and they check if there's, for example, child labor, they definitely would not like to work with that company. If there are not fire exits, and if it's a dingy, dark kind of a operation going on, they may not be interested in working with that particular factory. So this is something, a new concept that's coming up more and more, which is supply chain sustainability. And this is, this entire idea of making sure that the practices along the supply chain are correct, that the factories are, there are no major hazards on the factory floor where people can get seriously injured, or, there's child labor, or there are malpractices going on in the factory. So these are just not acceptable, especially if you are working with global clients. And so you want to make sure that your factory is laid out very well. You have a risk management process in place. If there are any hazardous processes, if there is any machine that, let's say it's nobody should touch the machine because it's very hot, then there are labels. It's labeled across the factory floor. And also, that there are no environmental issues. So if there's, a huge amount of pollution, there's maybe some, chemicals that are not being disposed of in the right way, then, maybe this could cost you a very big foreign order. And that's something very dangerous. So you want to make sure that you're very careful about health issues of your employees, safety, environment issues, and you're constantly improving, and all of these things. And you create sustainable products. Again, nowadays, a lot of people are saying that, look, I mean, you want to make sure that, people are interested in having recycled goods being made, or goods that can decompose. So maybe, people are not interested in just always using plastic a lot, or a high amount of plastic in products versus, biodegradable materials. So, it's people are now getting more and more conscious of these kind of things. And finally, it's very important to build a culture of responsibility and ownership, and empower your employees so that they are actually very proud to work in the company that they work for. They believe in the products that are being made, and they stand by the processes, and they feel comfortable, and they look forward to coming in every day to work. And these things are also extremely important. And again, nowadays, people are actually being forced to invest in their factories, and in building, and having good practices, sustainable practices across the factory floors. So with that, I come to an end of this lecture on lean operations. And I hope you enjoyed it, and you learned a lot from all these new concepts. All right, take care.